campus. We are on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. And yeah, as Courtney said, I am so excited to be here to share a little bit about our museum today, but hopefully what I'm going to tell you about is applicable to any of the spaces that you all work in. And I will change forever how you go into a grocery store. I'm sorry. I'll just apologize in advance. Okay, so the PME is what I like to call a little bit of an odd duck. We're known as a department museum, meaning that we are part of the UBC's Department of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences. And we actually started with just a few display cases of rocks and minerals in the lobby of an academic building. And some of our older faculty still call us the museum lobby. I cannot break them of that language. And I say we are a gallery. Let's refer to it as the gallery, but it's really stuck for a lot of people. And we're really working hard to shift how people see us as more than just a lobby. So one special tidbit about us for, if you're in Vancouver, if you ever do come to Vancouver and you visit UBC's campus, we're the only museum that's completely free to visit, although we do encourage donations. But as you can imagine, that comes with its own set of challenges. So we don't have a front desk, we have limited staff, and so often walking into our space isn't always typically the museum experience that one might expect. And so this can lead to some, amusing moments. We get all kinds of visitors in our gallery, whether it's students who are just on their way to class, tourists who have actually come to look for us, or staff or faculty who are just on their way to a meeting. And suddenly they're like, wait, am I in a museum? And this happens enough that we actually made signage that we put in the museum. And this on the left is one of our wayfinding signs that we tried to, poke fun at this common question that we hear from people that visit us. But here's the thing, these accidental encounters, these moments of curiosity are really what we've sort of leaned into and how we've designed our space. And so they've shaped how we think about our space, how we engage with our audience, that is maybe a little bit atypical for a museum. So I'll just paint a little bit of a picture for you. So again, if you haven't visited UBC, this is what our museum looks like from the outside. So we like to refer to ourselves as the hidden gem. And I mean that quite literally. We're a small museum. We are quite literally tucked away on UBC's giant campus. And so visitors often stumble upon us by accident. And it's actually not uncommon to hear someone say wow, I've been at UBC for 20 years and I never knew this place existed. The number of times I meet people in our main gallery for a meeting and they work on campus, but maybe they're over on the art side and they come in and they're like, I've been here for 2 decades and I didn't know you guys existed. But here's what gets interesting. So we're located inside of these academic buildings split across these two. The number one there on the slide is our main gallery, and it's literally tucked away behind this larger, newer building, the Earth Sciences building, which is denoted with the number 2. And that is more of our satellite gallery. And so to get to our main gallery, you literally have to navigate around this giant building. And students, whether they're in either gallery, getting to class, they literally have to walk through our main gallery or our satellite gallery. And so I always like to say that we've made attending class at UBC a little bit more educational because I don't know about you guys, but I did not get to walk through a museum on my way to class when I was an undergrad. So we don't just stop with university students. We have school-aged children who come on field trips. We have tourists. We have local families. There's quite a few families who live on UBC's campus now. And so on any given day, our audience is this really fun blend of academics, of kindergartners, and of people who, let's be honest, just came in because they were looking for a washroom and then they got distracted because we have dinosaurs. So this visitor mix has really forced us to think creatively about how we design and how we use our space. Because here's the thing, and this is what I'm going to talk about a little bit more as we go along, is how people experience a space, so how they move through it, how it makes them feel is really influenced by more than the objects that are in that space. So every element of that space, the lighting, the signs, the colors, even the layout acts as a kind of language that's sending unspoken messages to visitors about how they should behave, what to notice, how to engage. And so the space itself can actually influence the way that we interpret and that we understand it. And so to unpack this idea a little bit further, we're going to go on a brief detour. We're going to go to Whole Foods. So I warned you about seeing grocery stores differently. Okay, so I want to just pause for a moment. And I know maybe some of you are having lunch, maybe you're having a morning tea with a snack. And just imagine that you stepped into Whole Foods for a second. So my question for you is, how do you feel when you walk into this space? Feel free to drop a word in the chat or a sentence, and don't overthink it. Like, what stands out right away? What's the vibe that you get? All right, we got industrial, warm, ooh, hungry. I also said hungry. Everything looks fresh, right? Ooh, time to make a salad. Yeah, colorful, or yeah, very organized. And so here's the thing, these feelings that you're all sharing in the chat, they are not random. And they're not just about the organic avocados that you're going to put in that salad or the artisanal sourdough. This space is designed to make you feel a certain way. And so if we look closer at what's in this space, so look at the text on the walls. It's telling you, relax, reflect, rejuvenate. There's polished concrete floors, there's soft lighting, there's lots of natural tones that are actually whispering, hey, this place is of quality, care, and calm. There's all these messages like love how it's grown, supporting local farmers for over 40 years. They're not just informative, but they're telling you a story about the brand and more subtly about you as a shopper. And so some of these signs are obvious, although I can honestly say that before thinking about this, I don't know that I noticed the text on the wall in a grocery store. But these texts, they seem obvious now that I'm pointing them out, but others are more subtle, like the lighting or the use of natural materials. And together, they're creating this experience that feels intentional, it feels curated, it feels personal. So I want you to hold on to this thought because these same principles are at play in pretty much every space you walk into, and including museums. And that's where we're going to focus on. And before I move on, I want to point out two important concepts. So semiotics and the hidden curriculum. Semiotics is the study of signs and symbols and how we interpret them. And so in a space like Whole Foods or even in a museum, everything from the layout to the lighting to the colors acts as a sign. And so these elements are sending messages that influence how we behave, what do we focus on, and even how we feel about ourselves in that space. Now, the hidden curriculum takes this one step further, and it refers to the unspoken norms and expectations that are embedded in that space's design. And so these are cues that are telling us, often subconsciously, how we are supposed to act, whether it's lower our voice, take our time, or feel inspired, or feel hungry, for the example of Whole Foods. And so what's fascinating about these signals is that they're so deeply ingrained that we don't even realize we're picking up on them. So let's go to a museum entrance. So this is the entryway to the Museum of Brisbane. And what's the first thing that this space says to you? And it might not be the words that are on the signs or the walls, but trust me, the space itself is speaking. And so feel free to drop words in the chat if you want, or you can just think about it to yourself. One of the things I notice is the armchair. Yes, it is very sophisticated space. Looks corporate, Art Deco, great. And so to me, this space is saying, hey, take a moment, but please do it quietly. There's polished, beautiful hardwood floors. I would almost want to wipe my feet very well before I walked into this space. There's a lot of linear lines. There's subtle signs that are directing you where to move, keep left, museum entry. Everything about this space feels very orderly, feels intentional, but to me, it feels very calm. And so even the lighting and the layout are sending messages. So there's natural light coming in. There's a very, clean lines, clean geometry of the space. And this is signaling how we should behave when we come in. So I might instinctively lower my voice. I might slow down. I might slow my children down if they're running. I might even hesitate before laughing out loud or answering my cell phone. And so if we compare this to Whole Foods, the messaging there was telling you relax, rejuvenate, reflect. It was creating this vibe of calm and care, but in a different way. And here at the Museum of Brisbane, the hidden curriculum, or those unspoken design rules, they're setting this tone of quiet reflection. And so the space feels more thoughtful and it feels worthy of our respect. And so what's fascinating about these design elements or these cues is that they are shaping how we move through the space. They're shaping how we think and how we feel while we're in it. And for a museum space or truly any space, they can influence how we learn in that space. And so let's go to a slightly different type of museum space. So this is the Manitoba Museum Science Gallery. And what does it feel like to be here? Like, what is this space telling you without even saying a word? Yeah, it's fun. It's like colorful. Yeah, try this, touch me. Exactly. So those bright primary colors, the red, the blues, the yellows, they instantly create an atmosphere of playfulness and energy. This is not a place that you need to whisper or tiptoe. I would just send my kids in running. There's hands-on exhibits that are literally begging you with their language to touch them. Look at the shake hands with yourself mirror or the spinning disc in the front here. Everything is designed for you to explore and interact with. There's even step stools, which is saying to children, hey, this space is for you. Come on, step up, play with me. And so even the layout is part of this message. So there's no set path that you have to take. It's open, it's flexible, it's encouraging you to wonder, to stop, to discover whatever grabs your attention. And so if we compare this to the Museum of Brisbane, that space said, be calm, be intentional, whereas this space is more have fun, be curious, dive right in. And so this is semiotics and the hidden curriculum at work. So the design, the colors, the layout are creating an unspoken set of expectations about how you, as the visitor, should behave in the space and how you should feel in that space. And again, here's what's fascinating is it's not just about our behavior, but this also will shape how we learn in this space. So as in a science center in this gallery, they teach through play, through interaction, through experimentation. And it's very different from a learning experience from the quiet halls of a more traditional museum or an art gallery. And it's all driven by the design choices of the curators. And so in this space, they're telling you explore, engage, have fun. And at the Pacific Museum of Earth, we have taken inspiration from spaces like this that blend playfulness and interaction with intentional storytelling as a way to guide, but also invite our visitors. And so I'd love everyone. I hope that you've all visited a museum recently, but if you haven't, think about a museum that you visited, maybe in the last year, but maybe it was something from your childhood, something that's a really sticky memory for you. And I just want you to think about, was there something, maybe the lighting, the signage, or like maybe it was the silence of the space, or was the space very loud? How did that make you feel? Did it make you feel welcome? Did it make you feel out of place or uncomfortable? And maybe you can just drop in like a sentence or a word or two in the chat. I go to Science World a lot, either with my kids or just for work meetings. And it's a very different experience going on a weekday when it's not as busy and crowded than going on the weekend when it's totally overwhelming. All right, so we have Nemo Science Museum of Amsterdam. They had a space with real scientists in an enclosed area that was bright and loud with music. Ooh, nice touch. And there were so many kids. Yeah, participatory model. I love it. I've seen those types of rooms where they have like paleontologists looking at fossils and they invite kids in. Museum of Utah exhibits with a big wow factor. Absolutely. And so I'm going to pop up a few examples of visitor reflections that we've had at the Pacific Museum of Earth. And so these come from either, some chatting with our visitors, some actual written feedback. And three standout reflections that I'm going to highlight here are there were no clear signs and I didn't know where to go next. That's not very good. The dim lighting made it feel like I had to whisper. Also, not what we were going for. I loved how the colorful walls and exhibits made it feel fun and exciting. Okay, good. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. But these comments really reveal the duality of our space at the PME and some of the challenges that we face. Okay, so first, I'll be the first to say it. When visitors come into our satellite gallery, they're often unsure where to go next. So this is a photo of our North Gallery. It's the closest one to the main pedestrian thoroughfare on UBC campus. It's also right across from the Beatty Biodiversity Museum. So often folks come in here, and despite housing two dinosaurs and one marine reptile, you can see Dorothy suspended from the ceiling. The space hasn't been well branded as part of the museum, and so people don't often read it as the museum when they come in, and so it can be a little bit confusing and disorienting for visitors. Okay, others point out how dim lighting in certain areas create quiet, reverent atmosphere. And this aligns with the hidden curriculum that we've discussed, where lighting can behave the way that you act in a space, but it can also feel unapproachable to some. So we've actually had to work very hard in this gallery in particular. This is our Omniglobe gallery, to even make people feel like they can go inside because we have the door closed and it's dark. And so this can read, hey, this place is closed or it's off limits to some. And so one of our approaches that we did to try to, again, push people into the space is we added a hopscotch board on the floor as you go towards the door. So you literally, like, who can resist a hopscotch board? I mean, I don't know, my knees aren't great anymore, so I kind of like walk on it, but every time we see kids in there, and anytime I bring my kids into the PME, they always have to do the hopscotch, and then to get to the last arrow, you have to actually push the door open. And then finally, there were those who love the energy and the playfulness of our colorful exhibits in our main gallery, which again are signaling this fun and curiosity. And I'll go into that a little bit more in a minute. But this visitor feedback really highlights one of our biggest challenges at the PME, and that is perception. So despite our best efforts to date, the Pacific Museum of Earth doesn't always read as a museum. Why is this? It might sound like really silly that we haven't conquered this fundamental task of making our museum read like a museum, but there's a reason for that, and it's because we're located in what is known as a liminal space. This is a threshold between two states. So liminal spaces are places that sit somewhere in between. So think of an airport terminal. It's not quite a destination, but it's also not a place to really linger, although I'm sure many of you have been stuck in airport terminals for long periods of time. But a hotel lobby. So it's functional, it's transitional, but it's rarely the main reason that you're there. And so these spaces tend to carry a sense of movement. They're neither fully here nor there. And so at the PME, this liminality plays out in a few ways. So we are inside an academic building. So we have students with their giant backpacks and their coffees who are like totally unaware they're even in a museum. They're just walking to class. But we are a museum. We're also an academic department. So we have both K to 12 school groups in our space. We also have university researchers, grad students. And so this really blurs that boundary of what we think of as a traditional museum audience. We're also a transition space. So visitors are stumbling upon us by accident. Often they're heading somewhere else. They're just in the Earth Sciences building, this larger building. You can actually just walk straight through two sets of doors, which takes you right through that atrium just to do a shortcut across campus. And so we don't have those grand dedicated set of museum doors with the white steps and the columns that tell you you're transitioning into a museum. So this dual identity of being an academic space and a museum is both a challenge and an opportunity. So on the one hand, we do have to work harder to say, yes, this is a museum. But on the other hand, we can create moments of surprise and delight for our visitors who weren't even expecting to discover us. And so really at the PME, we're trying to embrace this in-between nature and turn it into one of our strengths. And so next I'm going to show you and take you a little bit more into the PME and tell you how we've approached this challenge through our design and through even some AI tools. Okay, if the designers at the PME saw this slide, they would pass out. So I apologize that I've put tiny text on my slide, but I just cut up our brochure because I felt like it gave the best glimpse of how we've used color as a visual tool in the PME. And so each of our exhibit areas are anchored by one bold and bright color. And so these visual cues tell our visitors where they are in the space. So red is for ancient life, and then all of those in like size 4 font, those are all the exhibits in that zone. Orange is solid earth or rocks and minerals. Green is our climate hallway. Blue is powerful planets. So these are all of our natural disaster exhibits. And then yellow is that dark Omniglobe and Gem Gallery. And so these colors do more than just help visitors find their way. They add a sense of fun and play. So we intentionally chose bright, joyful hues to invite that curiosity, to signal inclusivity, to send the message to our visitors that this space is to have fun in and to be explored. And so what makes this approach particularly unique is that our museum isn't housed in a traditional standalone building. Instead, we've had to layer the museum on top of the architecture and design that already exists at UBC. So these are existing academic spaces. And so we've actually had to try harder than, Science World or another space that was built intentionally to house exhibits to blend our exhibits into the fabric of what was already built. And so again, when these buildings were put up, they weren't necessarily intending to house a museum. And so by using these bold, bright colors throughout our gallery, we've aimed to create this cohesive experience that connects the exhibits, again, across our two buildings as a subtle way to guide our visitors, but also to make the space feel more alive, more playful, and more welcoming. This is my favorite slide in the whole talk, so I'm going to pause here for a second. So our designers at the Pacific Museum of Earth have intentionally and very strongly leaned away from a formal academic tone of our surroundings. We literally have like cartoon characters all throughout the museum. So we've embraced this very playful, approachable aesthetic that, again, speaks to children, invites that curiosity, that sort of storybook feel. And so I'll just highlight some of our main characters, some who you'll meet a little bit later in the talk. So Atlas the Ammonite is probably the main event. This guy down here, he's actually holding a little brochure, which is my favorite graphic. So he is our virtual visitor assistant, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. And then we have Ollie the octopus up in the top left corner, and Ollie guides our visitors through our oceanography hallway. And then we have Dr. Otson here with the yellow raincoat and Sealock Holmes, who help solve the mysteries of our Climate Clues exhibit. And so these characters, which are designed in this sort of flat, cartoon-like style with our bold colors, they have very organic shapes. They're throughout our branding, throughout our exhibits. And this playful presence of having literal cartoon drawings in the space transforms what might feel like a formal academic space into a more dynamic and kid-friendly environment. The number of photos I have of my 5-year-old, now 5, but when she was like 3 and 4, with Dr. Otson, who's much bigger in our climate hallway, I probably have 20 photos. Every time she goes in the museum, I'm like, hey, look at the dinosaurs. And she just wants a photo with Dr. Otson. So kids love them. And again, this design choice is very intentional. We want our visitors, and especially our kids, to feel like the space is for them. Again, writing for our audience. So the playful approach of our design extends to the language that we use for our signage within our exhibits. So we really try hard to make science engaging for everyone through a more approachable conversational language. And I would say we might err on the side of informal, but again, we really are trying to lean away from that academic voice as much as possible because we want to disrupt what people expect on an academic campus. And I'm not saying that UBC is not fun. So please, if you work at UBC, that's not what I'm trying to say, but we want to catch people off guard. So world's worst fish breath. This is literally a sandwich board that we have on like the main pedestrian corridor. I'm shocked that we haven't been told to take it down by UBC. But again, we really want to add this conversational tone and connect with our audience, whether they're kids, whether they're families, or if it's students going to class. Yeah, our admissions menu, it's a sushi menu. Like, why not? We're in Vancouver. And so now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and introduce you again to Atlas the Ammonite. They're holding his little brochure. And he is our AI powered virtual visitor assistant. And so Atlas isn't here just to guide our visitors, but he's also helping us learn about our visitors too. So he helps us, but he also helps the visitors. And so as I mentioned, we don't have a traditional front desk at the PME, and visitors can enter from multiple doorways. So they can come in our sciences building, they can come in our main gallery. Sometimes they come in by accident, like I said. And we wanted a way to ensure that everyone feels welcomed and equipped to explore. And so Atlas solved this by acting as sort of a digital guide. And he's always there to help just on a smartphone. So you can see folks scanning QR codes in our gallery. So the photo on the right is when you walk into the main gallery. This is the first thing you see. Welcome to the Pacific Museum of Earth. I'm Atlas the Ammonite. Let's get you checked in and ready to explore. And then here in the middle, I'll just play this video. So this is an example of the AI-powered text-based conversation that a visitor might have when they scan that first QR code. So Atlas greets them warmly, asks them a few questions, and this is what helps us gather a little bit of insight about our visitors. But then Atlas provides assistance. So he helps navigate the museum, tells them about some of the exhibits. There's even little pop quizzes or trivia peppered throughout the experience. And so for us, Atlas sort of functions like an extra staff member, filling in where our staff can't always be. Okay, I apologize for putting data on a lunch and learn talk. Is that allowed? It's very exciting for us. One of our biggest challenges at the Pacific Museum of Earth is figuring out who our visitors are. Um, we have no trouble with our school groups. Those are all like tracked and easy to understand who's coming in. But for folks who just walk into our galleries, for years we were like, we have no idea. We put out a guest book that people can sign in, but it mostly ends up being like kids drawing giant pictures of dinosaurs across all the lines, which is very cute, but doesn't tell us much about who's coming in. So again, we don't have a front desk, we don't have a ticketing system, so it's really tough for us to know like who we're reaching. Are we reaching locals, tourists? Are they all UBC students coming in, or is it just school groups and then sort of a trickle of visitors? And so this information has been so critical, and it's not just helping us tailor our exhibits, but it's also helping us show value to our stakeholders, to the department that funds a lot of our activities. And again, this is where Atlas helps. So this data came directly from that check-in feature that he starts out the conversation with. And this is it's about 6 to 8 months of data. And so on the top left, we now know the type of visitor group that comes in. So we see that 40% of our visitors come alone, while other visitors come in pairs or small groups. And this tells us that our space needs to work both for solo visitors and for social groups. On the top right, we know that 76% of our visitors are members of the general public, while 19% are UBC students, which is great. And again, this split helps us understand how to balance the content for these audiences. And then on the bottom, and not just because it's the most colorful plot, but on the bottom, we know where these people are coming from. So I would have assumed, I mean, again, I had no idea really because our guest book didn't give us this granular type of data, but we know that most of our audience is from Vancouver, but also we're seeing strong engagement from across Canada and even internationally. And one last data slide. So this has also been amazing to understand when people are coming into the museum. So if we look at this data, one thing that stands out is that we are consistently busy throughout our opening hours. So we're open Monday to Friday, 10 to 5. While there's like a slight spike on Monday and maybe around noon, That activity, I would say, is quite steady across the board. There's no real slow period, which is great. You'll see that there's a drop on Saturday. That's because we're not open on the weekend, but we have opened a few times for special events. And again, this consistency means that we can really focus our resources evenly throughout the day without worrying about there being a lull at a certain time or a certain day of the week. But it also highlights that we're meeting a demand, even without weekend opening hours, which is something great as we think about, how we expand our hours in the future. Okay, so as I mentioned, we've been piloting Atlas for about 8 months. And we've had over 1,000 conversations. We've received over 5,000 player messages. And this means that we have talked to more visitors in our gallery than ever before, which, in my opinion, is a huge leap in engagement. And so here's how it works. Visitors can chat with Atlas throughout their visit. There's QR codes embedded in all the different zones of our gallery, as the check-in point. They can ask, it's just like chatting with sort of like those virtual assistants that are on websites. So you can ask anything, where's the washroom? Or you can even ask more fun questions like, what did this Daspletosaurus eat for breakfast? And so using a curated knowledge base that we wrote, Atlas then delivers answers and we can tell him like, hey, be a little bit funny or be cheeky. And so the system is powered by AI, but it's more tightly controlled than, say, ChatGPT, which could hallucinate or generate more unpredictable answers. And so we want to make sure that it's not doing that for our visitors. So Atlas can only pull from information from content that we provide. And so this of course, makes us feel better. It ensures that there's no confusion in our visitors. And sometimes Atlas does say, like, I don't know what the answer is. But the nice thing is that we can see the questions that people have asked, and then we can also see what Atlas has responded with. And so then we can just improve the knowledge base. We can add content. And so it's kind of like fine-tuning a staff member and teaching them on the go. And visitors are noticing. So I just put in this little screen grab from a Google review. I love the chat app that came with the museum. Very fun. That's awesome. And then finally, I'll just mention that we are trying to expand this technology across all the UBC attractions because we want to create a better, more cohesive visitor experience. So imagine arriving at UBC. It's a huge campus. But imagine on your smartphone, you have this digital guide that's connecting you to all the amazing spaces that we have on campus so that you can make the most of your visit. And I mean, I'll just tell you how it would work from the PME standpoint, because often folks, they've heard about the Museum of Anthropology, and so they're there. But let's say they have an extra hour before they have to go back and get on their cruise ship. The tool could then say, hey, walk over to the Pacific Museum of Earth. They've got dinosaurs, they've got gems, they've got fossils, and it could give you walking directions. Or maybe, you've heard about the Beatty Biodiversity Museum. Often when I tell people I work at a museum at UBC, they're like, oh, the one with the whale. But again, say you're at the Beatty Biodiversity Museum and you've got 20 minutes before your bus leaves. This digital interface could tell you, hey, just across the street, there's a free museum that's worth exploring. And so I see this as potential to create a very unified visitor experience across our campus that will help people discover the spaces that they might otherwise miss, which, is usually the PME. But again, we're working on that. And then this is my last slide. I just want to say thanks to everyone who came today. I hope you enjoyed your lunch with a little story time. I've loved sharing how we do engagement at the PME, and I hope I've inspired you to think about the hidden potential of your own spaces, whether that is a classroom space, or I see some folks here from museums, or even a lab space. And yeah, I've put my email there. I can put it in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me or find me on LinkedIn. And yeah, I'm happy to answer questions.
Thanks so much, Kirsten. That was awesome. I need to do my little clapping emoji.
Oh, thank you, Leslie,
find
for
it.
saying that we love data.
All right, so now we have about 20 minutes or so for people to ask questions. So feel free to put them in the chat or just turn off your mic and Perfect. I see we have Leslie has a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, and funnily enough, it's about the data you presented, Kirsten. So, in the one of the responses, I think it was the origin of visitors. You had different provinces, but then you had Canada as a category. Is that data cumulative? So all of the provinces fit into that pie, or is that something that, yeah? So
Oh,
just curious.
you know what? These graphs were put together by the company that hosts the AI visitor assistant. I actually didn't notice that. I'll mention that to them.
Okay, I don't mean to be a
No,
jerk.
no, no.
I just thought that it was very curious
Ontario's
to
not a
me.
country.
Well, but Canada, is that all the visitors? And again, it could be the way that it's set up. So if people just say they're from Canada, then that's your result. But if
Hmm.
people say they're from Ontario, Canada, that is like,
Yeah,
how is that represented in the data? So again, never apologize for data. It's one of the best ways to tell your story. And this was a wonderful presentation. And Courtney and I have had many deep talks, and I think that I missed my calling to work in museums. I wish I was considerably earlier in my career path. So what a great job you have, and what a great presentation. Thanks so much.
thank you.
Steve has a question.
Yeah, thanks for a great presentation. I echo that comment. Really fun. I also run a small on-campus free museum, and it's in Montana. And I'm wondering about, you had a couple capture points, if you want to call them, at the Museum of Anthropology and the other biodiversity museum. Does the department still have that courtyard that they put in during the building of the new building?
Yes,
So
you mean in between the, yeah, kind
yeah,
of.
if you walk out of your museum space into the
Yep.
that, do you use that at all as part of the museum, or is that kind of a separate
So
thing
yeah.
because it
So I
rains
don't
every
know.
day?
Yeah, I don't know the last time you were on campus, Steve, but we've actually put in a new outdoor exhibit called the Walk Through Time. Have you seen that?
No, I haven't.
So the idea for that exhibit was to physically connect people from the front door of our museum to the Beatty
I see.
Biodiversity Museum, but UBC wouldn't let us go all the way across Main Mall, and they decided
Yeah,
that literally at the 11th hour. Anyhow, so it got split into two exhibits, but it's just a metal walkway that's embedded in that courtyard, and it starts with the formation of Earth and goes all the way to present day, and it wraps around the Earth Sciences building.
cool.
And again, we use that for wayfinding, but the courtyard itself, there were plans, I think, when they were putting up the building or when they were designing the building to make that space more interactive and like a
Yeah,
learning space. But I think the landscape architects like leaned away from that and
yeah.
focused more on aesthetics
Okay.
and ignored
Yeah,
all the educators who were like, hey, we could make this a space
yeah,
where like students could do, mock field test
yeah,
site testing or yeah.
yeah. Okay. And then also with your digital engagement, what company is that?
So yeah, I didn't mention that. It's called Hello Lamppost. And
Okay.
I'm very happy to, I was gonna like go in, I had a lot more slides about
Yeah,
them.
yeah,
They started working with our director of parking at UBC. And so like if anyone's come to campus, there's on bike racks and on all the parking meters, it's like, hey, I'm a talking parking meter, ask me anything. And it's helped with, sort of just general parking woes on campus, but it's also been a way for the parking to get feedback on what's happening and to help people pay for parking. And so it was actually Brian Jones, the director of parking, who approached me and said, hey, can we run a pilot in the PME of this technology and then sort of show as proof of concept to expand it across the different visitor spaces on campus? Because I think now it's in the dining halls, it's in some of the hotels. So they have it as like a virtual concierge. So you can be in your room and just scan a QR code and ask it anything. But it's been great. And I'm happy to like send you more info or do
yeah,
like an e-introduction with the CEO.
yeah. Cool. Thanks. I'm just gearing up to have something digital. And then the last question will, you asked for donations. Do you have a sense for how many museum visitors you have per year? And then the amount to donate?
Yeah, so before May, like before we introduced this technology, we had kind of no idea
Yeah,
like how many people came in. I mean, we had ideas of how many school groups came in, but I treat that quite separately from just the visitor who strolls in.
yeah,
Uh, but our donations were like maybe around $2,000 a year, so like not that high. And so what we've done this year is we've added a way to donate online because often before we had a cash box and often people would come into the space and like nobody carries cash or you have like a weird amount of cash with you and you're like, oh, I don't want to give $20. I've just been
yeah,
here for 20 minutes. And so we've made it really easy, and we've also again guided our visitors. So we call it an admissions menu, even though it's like admission by donation. But
yeah,
we've instructed them. We're like, if you're alone, give us $10. If you're with two
yeah.
people, give us $20. And we've seen a huge increase, like just in again since like May, I would say we've tripled our donations, like, and not even in like for the year. I mean, in what we would normally see for a full year.
Nice. Great. Thank you.
I have a question for Kirsten.
Hey, Francis.
Yeah, it's about semiotics. And you said something along the lines of how every aspect of a space is sending an unspoken or subconscious message. I'm wondering how constraining the cultural perspectives of visitors are. Can you introduce semiotics that are, quote, universal? or could some of those hidden messages be misinterpreted by some people? I mean, do we know anything about that kind of challenge?
Oh,
Especially in
absolutely.
Vancouver, which is highly diverse in terms of the people who can come through it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say too, I mean, I didn't really get into this, but like being on an acad or university campus is like a whole other shell of semiotics, right? Like not everyone feels welcome in that space. If you didn't attend university, you may be less likely to bring your children all the way out there. We're also far away from the sort of core of downtown Vancouver. So there's a lot that goes into that. And yes, I would definitely say, and I know we've talked about this a lot in our team meetings about the language that we use is we want to make sure that it isn't confusing. Like while we try to make it engaging and fun, there is a huge diversity of nationalities that come into our galleries, and we want to make sure that it doesn't detract from the meaning or the understanding that folks take away from the science that we're presenting.
Yeah, I think that's going to be an ongoing, continuous discussion.
Absolutely.
Hello, I have two questions. Yes, it's a very great talk. I love the talk. The first question I have is so you mentioned that there's lots of people is just stumble into the museum, and then you have like the big portion are visitor. I'm just like curious, like in that visitor group, like is there like do you know the portion people actually just stumble into? They are actually not intentionally coming to the museum, and then they just stumble into it as a museum. Like, will it be any difference, like people who just stumble and then people who actually search online? And then do you have any numbers for those two groups?
No, but that's a great question. And actually, while I was putting together these slides, I was like, I should add this question into the check-in. We were trying to streamline it so that people don't get overwhelmed and bored and then like stop checking in, right? So we were trying to do like just a few quick, like, what's the data we want? But that is something that we are interested in. And again, like, I mean, we could talk to people, but the chat bot widget is the easiest way to capture that. And I do think that we'll probably explore asking a quick question of like, yeah, did you mean to visit us? Or did you come by
Yeah,
accident?
yeah, because I think I will actually be kind of if you stumble in and then if you like searching for it, probably like your approach of recruitment will be kind of a little bit different. And my second question is like because it is in a university space, like do you have any obstacle like kind of balance like because you want to make kids feel welcoming, and then if they can be very engaged and then probably they will be loud, but then also like inside the building of like people working space, people probably don't want to have kids screaming next door. So I'm just curious, how do you kind of balance it? Like talk to the department about everything to design at the beginning to, because I guess you need to know how loud you can be before
Yeah.
you design everything ahead. Can you walk me through a bit?
Yeah, so I mean, the nice thing about both of our galleries is that there's no office spaces that touch it. There are classrooms, and we've had, and just recently, we've had students writing final exams in one of the classrooms off the museum, and they've had to come out and be like, "Can you make the like 38-year-olds quiet down so that we can write our exam?" But I would say that's quite rare. And so our space, like the main gallery space, it feels really intimate, and like we do intentionally keep the lighting a little bit lower so that it's not bright and people just walk in and like run around, even though sometimes students do. But again, we're trying to send that message of like have fun, but like don't go crazy. Like we aren't Science World. We don't have the staff to clean up like a huge mess every hour. But again, we're trying to still make kids feel welcome through all these other subtle design choices that I mentioned. And then in their sciences building, the space is huge, and there's often like on any given weekday, there's like 100 undergrads in there studying, talking, having meetings. So I would say that space just already has a like an ambient buzz to it that even when we have kids in, like I think people really love it, honestly, to like see a group of kids. When we just put up this new exhibit this summer, and when we built the Daspletosaurus, that big Tyrannosaur skeleton, we invited all the UBC daycares to come out and watch. And it was this like huge media event, but it was beautiful. There was like 63-year-olds like sitting, and they all had their dinosaur sweatshirts and like backpacks on, all sitting around like watching the folks who are building the skeletons. So again, I think that the nice thing is that the academics who work in our space know that there's a museum there, and so they do welcome that chaos occasionally. Like in our main gallery, one of the other things I didn't mention is we share it with a geochemistry lab that's like, white walls, like very clean, and it has like very expensive instruments, but it literally touches like the fun space in a way.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So, Kirsten, it looks like we have another question in the chat from Louise, and I think it's a really good point. So, what could you bring into a classroom to make the space more fun or exciting? I was thinking perhaps colorful posters or geology maps. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I have lots of thoughts on classroom design, and I've read a lot about this, especially for, I don't know if anyone's like a K through 12 educator, but especially for younger groups. But again, even at the university level, I feel like my main things are uh, organization, because to me that sends like a tone of like how people should behave and act in the space. So having like a tidy, organized space. But yeah, having a lot of colors, having a lot of content of what they're going to learn, but not in an overwhelming way, right? You don't want to have every wall surface covered. But one of my favorite memories as a student was, and I feel like, I don't know if any of you know Ben Kennedy. He used to teach at UBC. He's now in New Zealand, but he would pick a song he was teaching our natural disasters course, the volcano section, and he would pick a song that had like the word magma in it or volcano or hot, and he would play it as students came in. So it sort of set this tone, like lighthearted tone. And one of my most memorable experiences as a student was an instructor who would play like hip hop music when we came in. And it just sort of made you laugh and feel at ease and calm. But yeah, there's lots of like people have written like dissertations on this. So there's lots out there. But yeah, I would say my top three are like keep it super organized and make it fun, because people like if they're having fun, they might learn accidentally as well.
And then there's a question from Tara in the chat. Does PME provide QR codes or other digital access to a self-guided tour of the museum or scavenger hunt type activity?
Yeah, so the Atlas, the Ammonite tour or virtual visitor assistant has a tour. So I didn't get to that part in the chat, but basically if you once you check in, then you're greeted with like literally color buttons that you can choose based on the different themes of the museum. And so it's like, do you want to learn about fossils? Do you want to learn about rocks and minerals? And then you choose one of those tours and it guides you through our exhibits and gives you fun facts. It asks you quiz questions and it sort of nudges you around the space. Because again, when folks come in, the layout of our space is quite open, and so we don't have a set path. There's no necessarily like hallways or galleries that you need to move between. So it's just like choose your own adventure. And so we wanted to give folks like a little bit more guidance and prompting of how they can navigate the space. And we do have on our website, we do have a scavenger hunt that we have educators download if they want to have more of a guided experience in the gallery that's like on a piece of paper. But again, this is why, in my opinion, this type of technology is great because we can, like next week, if we changed our mind and wanted to update some of the content, we just write to the content creators at Hello Lamppost and they help us make those changes on the back end. Even when we put in this exhibit here and the photo on the right, we left it off the tour initially because we launched the chat widget before this was done. And then once we sort of had all the content and it felt like it was solidified to be presented to visitors, we sent them, a whole series of text and then they integrated it into the tour, which was great. And so it's very adaptable, very easy to change things.
So I just put another, maybe more of a discussion point in the chat. For everyone here, have you ever consciously designed a space or a program with emotional impact of your audience in mind? What worked or didn't work? Prison education, interesting. Philip, do you want to expand on that? I'm very interested in that.
Yeah, thanks, Kirsten. It was a great talk, and a lot of the things, kind of really resonated. In terms of like prison education, if trying to teach people in prisons who are maybe outside of the normal education system, then teaching in traditional education classrooms isn't good because it's a space that's probably not associated negatively. So trying to change that dynamic and change that environment to make it about learning but in a different way is kind of you have to think about everything really and all the things that you've kind of mentioned here. I also worked in fresh produce in a supermarket, and we talked about the market research in terms of walking into a supermarket, and the first thing you ever see in any supermarket is the fresh produce because it gives this you don't want to see you basically you don't want to see the racks and racks of craft dinner, do you? So you just want to see some fresh produce. So that really talked about that too. In terms of bridge education, getting that mindset of giving someone in a positive space to learn, but also making sure that this education is different to the ones that they've received before requires thinking about that space.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I imagine that would be difficult because I wouldn't think that there's much that you can do in terms of physical things in a prison educating space.
We do a lot of teaching in libraries, so
okay.
So you just try and find a place that isn't is something a bit more welcoming. So if it's something like a library, something like that, it's a neutral venue almost. And if you have a neutral venue, then that again, it's all what Kirsten's been saying about kind of changing that idea and allowing people to see things differently. So things like that. Having seating in a circle, giving people a literal seat at the table of education in some ways. Also kind of thinking about those metaphors.
Yeah, that's actually another good point about a classroom is how the desks are arranged can even signal to the students like how you feel about them. Obviously, there's, the classrooms are set up in a certain way on university campuses. You can't always change that, but if you do have a smaller class, put your students in a circle, sit at their level with them, talk to them.
And I don't know if we have anyone who works in like stakeholder engagement here, but I imagine it would be a very similar thing, right? A lot of times, you'll have the CEOs or whoever at the front of the room talking about what they're going to do to a bunch of people sitting in the rows, right? So like, that dynamic, how is that going to translate to them, right? So, yeah. All right, it looks like we only have 1 minute left, so maybe if there's one more question, feel free to include it. If not, thanks everyone for joining us. And thanks, of course, Kirsten. This was fantastic. Kirsten, I've recorded this talk, so if it's okay with you, I could share it to division members. Yeah,
Sure.
so okay. All right. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks and congratulations. Happy holidays, everyone. We'll see you in
Happy
June.
holidays.
Bye. Come visit the PME.
I wish. Next visit. Thanks. Bye.